The camera, hidden inside 9-year-old Emily Johnson's coffin, recorded for 16 minutes before the cremation began, capturing a single frame that would haunt forensic experts for years, her small, pale hand pushing against the coffin lid. Linda Johnson had slipped the modified pinhole camera beneath her daughter's favorite stuffed rabbit just moments before the final viewing, desperate to preserve any last moment with her child. She never expected to document her worst nightmare. The mortician had pronounced Emily dead 3 days earlier after finding no pulse, no breathing, and her body temperature had dropped well below normal human levels. Death certificate signed, funeral arrangements made, the grieving family had gathered to say goodbye at Harrison Funeral Home on that cold December morning. What the hidden camera revealed would change everything we understand about death itself.
The footage initially showed nothing unusual, just the satin interior of the coffin, Emily's peaceful face, and the dim lighting of the closed casket. But at minute 14, as the coffin was being moved toward the crematorium, something impossible happened. Emily's right hand twitched, then her eyelids fluttered, and finally, in that single horrifying frame that would later be examined by forensic video analysts at the FBI, her small hand clearly pressed against the lid. By then, it was too late. The cremation had already begun. Dr. Robert Kinsella, Chief Medical Examiner for Cook County, with 36 years of experience and over 4,000 autopsies performed, was the first official to review the footage. "In my professional opinion, what we're seeing defies medical explanation," he stated during the initial investigation. "I've pronounced hundreds of people dead. I know death. This is something else entirely." His hands trembled as he replayed the footage for the 7th time, his coffee growing cold beside the computer. The veteran medical examiner had to excuse himself twice during the viewing, visibly shaken by what he was seeing. The Johnson family had noticed nothing unusual about Emily's death at first. She had fallen ill with what seemed like a common cold 3 weeks earlier. Mild fever, congestion, fatigue, nothing that alarmed her pediatrician. But on the night of December 3rd, Emily's mother found her unresponsive in bed. No pulse, no breathing, skin cold to the touch. Paramedics arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation for 48 minutes before pronouncing her dead at 11:27 p.m. The initial death certificate listed cardiac arrest of unknown etiology as the cause. Nothing suggested they should question this conclusion. Linda Johnson would later tell investigators that she placed the camera in the coffin not out of suspicion, but from a mother's desperate grief. "I just wanted to be with her every second until the end," she sobbed during her testimony. "I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone in the dark." The camera was small, designed for covert surveillance, with a battery life of approximately 20 hours and motion-activated recording. The funeral director had no knowledge of its presence. Neither did Emily's father or her 2 older brothers. This was Linda's private, final connection to her daughter. What makes this case even more disturbing is what happened when authorities attempted to recover Emily's remains from the crematorium. Upon opening the retort, the chamber where bodies are cremated, workers made a discovery that caused one attendant to vomit on the spot, and another to resign his position that same day. Emily's remains showed clear evidence of movement during the cremation process. Her arm bones were found in a position consistent with someone trying to shield their face from intense heat. Her skull was turned to one side, jaw open, in what forensic anthropologists would later describe as a position consistent with a scream. These findings directly contradicted established knowledge about how bodies behave during cremation, where muscles might contract, but purposeful movement is impossible. The positioning of the remains indicates consciousness during the initial stages of cremation, stated Dr. Eleanor Reed, forensic anthropologist called in to examine what was left. Her voice cracked slightly during the press conference as she removed her glasses to wipe her eyes. "This case will fundamentally change how we approach death certification in this country. We simply cannot explain what we're seeing through our current understanding of human physiology. But what exactly had happened to Emily Johnson? How could a child pronounced dead by experienced paramedics, confirmed deceased by a licensed physician, and observed without signs of life for 3 days suddenly show signs of movement? The investigation that followed would lead medical professionals down a disturbing path, questioning everything they thought they knew about death itself. Toxicology reports from blood samples taken during Emily's autopsy showed trace amounts of tetrodotoxin, a powerful neurotoxin found in certain species of pufferfish and blue-ringed octopuses. In high enough doses, tetrodotoxin can induce a death-like state where breathing and heartbeat become undetectable by standard methods, while consciousness remains. However, the levels in Emily's system were far too low to cause such effects, presenting the first of many contradictions in this case. When investigators searched the Johnson home, they found no evidence of pufferfish or any exotic seafood. The family didn't even like sushi. Emily's school lunches, refrigerator contents, and recent restaurant visits revealed nothing that could explain the presence of the toxin. It was as if the substance had materialized in her bloodstream without explanation. More disturbing still, when authorities exhumed the bodies of 3 other children who had died of unknown causes in the same county that year, 2 showed similar trace amounts of the same neurotoxin. "We're dealing with something unprecedented," admitted Detective Marcus Calloway, lead investigator on the case. His normally steady hands shook visibly as he showed reporters a timeline of events. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed weeks of sleepless nights. "Either we have a series of poisonings that somehow evaded detection, or we're witnessing a phenomenon that cannot be explained by current medical science." The detective would later request a transfer out of homicide, citing irreconcilable trauma from his work on the Johnson case. As news of the camera footage spread, 17 other families came forward with similar accounts of deceased loved ones showing unexplained signs of movement or awareness after death pronouncement. In 3 cases, funeral directors admitted to hearing sounds from within closed caskets, but had dismissed them as normal settling of the body or gas escaping from the corpse. One mortician in rural Illinois resigned after admitting he had witnessed a recently deceased elderly man open his eyes during embalming, but had told no one for fear of losing his license. "I've been carrying that secret for 12 years, he confessed, voice barely audible. "I thought I was losing my mind." The most chilling testimony came from crematorium technician Victor Martinez, who had operated the equipment the day of Emily's cremation. "I heard screaming," he stated flatly during his interview, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the room. "Not like a machine noise or metal expanding. Human screaming. A child screaming." Martinez had worked at the facility for 22 years, and had never reported anything unusual before. 3 days after giving his statement, he was found in his garage, having taken his own life. The note he left behind contained just 4 words: "I couldn't save her." Linda Johnson collapsed when shown the enhanced footage of her daughter's movement in the coffin. Medical staff had to sedate her, and she remained hospitalized for 3 weeks following the revelation. Her husband filed for divorce 6 months later, unable to forgive her for what he called turning our daughter's death into a circus. Their 2 sons were placed in therapy, where they reported recurring nightmares of being trapped in burning boxes, unable to escape. The family that had once lived a quiet, unremarkable life in suburban Chicago was shattered beyond repair. But the most unsettling developments were yet to come. As medical researchers delved deeper into the case, they discovered something that defied conventional explanation. Brain tissue samples preserved from Emily's autopsy showed unusual activity when stimulated in the lab, activity that should be impossible in dead tissue.
Neurons fired in patterns consistent with consciousness when exposed to certain electrical frequencies. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, neurologist at Johns Hopkins University, observed the phenomenon firsthand and struggled to maintain his scientific composure.
This tissue is responding as if it's still part of a functioning brain, he whispered, backing away from the microscope, as if death never fully occurred at the cellular level. Further tests revealed similar anomalies in tissue samples from the other children with tetrodotoxin in their systems. In each case, the children had died suddenly after mild illnesses. In each case, brain tissue showed this unexplained potential for activity long after death should have rendered it inert. And in each case, the families reported the children having spoken of shadow people visiting them in the nights before their deaths. 7-year-old Michael Torres, whose death preceded Emily's by just 2 months, had told his mother about the thin man who stands in my closet and watches me sleep. 5-year-old Abigail Wright had drawn pictures of tall, elongated figures standing around her bed.
Emily Johnson herself had mentioned people made of smoke to her school counselor 3 days before her death, but the comment had been dismissed as normal childhood imagination. The counselor later took extended leave, suffering from what colleagues described as acute professional guilt. When investigators compiled these accounts, an unsettling pattern emerged. Each child had complained of seeing these figures for exactly 9 days before their deaths. Each had experienced a mild illness that suddenly turned fatal. And, most disturbing of all, each had died with their eyes open, fixed on a corner of the room as if watching something approach. The implications sent shockwaves through the medical community, with some physicians refusing to participate further in the investigation. "What we're suggesting is unthinkable," admitted Dr. Eleanor Reed in a closed-door meeting with federal officials that was later leaked to the press. That these children were somehow between states of life and death for days before their clinical death was pronounced. That consciousness can persist even when all measurable signs of life have ceased, and that something we cannot detect with our instruments, may be facilitating this transition. Her colleagues stared at their notes, unwilling to meet each other's eyes as the implications hung heavy in the air. The investigation took an even darker turn when research assistant Lily Chen, working late in the laboratory where Emily's tissue samples were stored, reported a disturbing incident. "I was alone in the lab around 2 in the morning, she stated, her voice barely above a whisper during her official interview. All the samples were secured in the containment unit. But I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Then I saw it, a reflection in the computer screen. A small hand pressed against the glass of the containment unit. A child's hand." Chen suffered a complete psychological breakdown and remained under psychiatric care for 6 months following the incident. The security footage from that night showed no one entering or leaving the lab, but did capture an inexplicable 17-minute power fluctuation that left the cameras recording only static. By this point, government agencies had become involved. The CDC initiated Protocol 7, a rarely used classification for potential biological threats of unknown origin. The Department of Defense dispatched specialists in unconventional pathology. Religious leaders from various faiths were quietly consulted. The investigation had moved beyond science into uncharted territory that left even the most skeptical researchers profoundly disturbed. What they discovered in the homes of the affected families defies rational explanation. In each house, specialized equipment detected electromagnetic anomalies centered around the deceased children's bedrooms. Black mold with unusual properties was found growing in hidden spaces, behind wallpaper, under floorboards, inside air vents. The mold contained compounds that could theoretically produce hallucinations, but nothing that explained the tetrodotoxin or the persistent neural activity after death. Most unsettling were the temperature readings. Each child's bedroom exhibited cold spots that could drop as much as 15 degrees Fahrenheit without any explainable cause. These cold areas would move throughout the rooms, avoiding detection equipment and disappearing when directly observed, only to reappear elsewhere. It's as if something is still there, moving around these spaces, noted Dr. Catherine Novak, quantum physicist brought in to analyze the phenomena, something that understands it's being observed and adapts accordingly. Dr. Novak requested to be removed from the investigation 3 days later, citing irreconcilable conflicts with established physical laws. The investigation hit a wall when key evidence began to disappear. The original camera that captured Emily's movement in the coffin vanished from a secure evidence locker. Blood samples from all 4 children were found corrupted by an unidentified contaminant that rendered them useless for further testing. Most alarmingly, the enhanced video footage of Emily's movement began to degrade on every device where it was stored, as if the image itself was being slowly erased from existence. At this point, a division formed among the investigators. One faction, led by rationalists determined to find a scientific explanation, hypothesized about a new pathogen that could mimic death while preserving consciousness, a terrifying prospect that would rewrite medical understanding of life's end.
Another group, smaller but growing as evidence mounted, began to consider explanations outside conventional science, that something was harvesting these children, something that existed in the boundary between life and death. I was a skeptic my entire career, confessed Dr. Robert Kinzel in what would be his final interview before his unexpected retirement. I believed only in what I could measure, quantify, and reproduce under controlled conditions, but after examining all 16 cases, after witnessing things I cannot explain with my medical training, I'm left with one disturbing conclusion. He paused, visibly struggling with his next words. Death is not the simple biological process we've assumed it to be. Consciousness doesn't end when the heart stops beating, and sometimes something waits for us in that transitional state. Linda Johnson, who had retreated from public view after the initial media frenzy, emerged 11 months after her daughter's death with a troubling new development. She had been recording audio in her home, convinced she could still hear Emily's voice at night. Most recordings contained nothing but normal house sounds, the settling of foundations, the hum of appliances. But one 3-minute segment, analyzed by audio experts from 3 separate laboratories, contained what they all agreed was the voice of a young girl, barely audible beneath the static. "Mommy, they're still here," the voice whispered. "They're watching you too now." When the recording was played for Emily's former teacher, she confirmed without hesitation that it was Emily's voice. The teacher then requested a transfer to another school district and refused to discuss the matter further. The audio file itself became corrupted 2 days after analysis, leaving only transcripts as evidence it ever existed. As the investigation approached its 2nd year, patterns began emerging beyond the original cases. Statisticians identified a troubling increase in sudden, unexplained deaths among children aged 5 to 11 in areas where the original cases had occurred. None showed the tetrodotoxin marker, but all died with similar expressions of fixed terror. Parents reported children speaking of thin shadows and people made of smoke in increasing numbers. Child psychologists initially attributed this to media coverage of the Johnson case, but became concerned when details emerged that had never been made public. Perhaps most disturbing was the case of 6-year-old Zoe Pemberton, who had been friends with Emily Johnson. Exactly 1 year after Emily's death, Zoe began telling her parents that Emily visited her at night. "She's different now," Zoe told her increasingly concerned mother. "She's still Emily, but there are others inside her too." Zoe's parents installed cameras in her room, seeking to reassure their daughter that nothing was there.
What they captured instead caused them to abandon their home the same night, leaving all possessions behind. The footage, which became classified under national security protocols, reportedly showed temperature fluctuations visible through thermal imaging and a distinct child-sized outline standing beside Zoe's bed for 3 hours and 27 minutes. Lip readers brought in to analyze Zoe's side of the conversation reported her saying, "I don't want to go with you. They look hungry." The Pemberton family was relocated under a program typically reserved for witness protection, their current whereabouts unknown.
5 of the 17 researchers who had direct contact with tissue samples from the affected children have since died of rare aggressive cancers, prompting an internal investigation that remains ongoing. 3 others developed early-onset dementia with unusual presentations, including the ability to recall conversations that never occurred and recognize people they had never met. The remaining researchers have been placed under medical observation, though 2 have disappeared after reporting figures watching them from doorways and windows. The Centers for Disease Control officially classified the Johnson case and its related incidents as unexplained cluster phenomenon UX117, effectively ending the public investigation. All samples, documentation, and evidence were transferred to a secure facility whose location remains undisclosed.
Official statements maintain that a rare pathogen was responsible, likely transmitted through contaminated water supplies, and that the issue has been resolved. However, Linda Johnson continues her private investigation, operating a website where parents can report similar occurrences. To date, she has documented over 300 cases across 42 states, with patterns matching her daughter's death. Her most recent update, posted 3 weeks ago, contained a disturbing personal admission. "I've started seeing them too. The shadow people. They stand in the corners of my bedroom. They watch me as I type this. And sometimes, when they think I'm not looking, they wear my daughter's face." The original funeral home where Emily Johnson's body was prepared for cremation has since closed its doors, citing insurmountable business difficulties following the incident. The building remains vacant, though nearby residents report lights turning on at night despite the electricity having been disconnected years ago. 3 separate potential buyers have backed out of purchases, each refusing to specify their reasons. Local children avoid the sidewalk in front of the property, crossing to the other side of the street without being told to do so. Perhaps the final, most chilling note in this ongoing mystery comes from Dr. Kinsella's personal journal, found in his home after he failed to appear for a scheduled deposition. The last entry, dated just 3 days before his disappearance, read, "I understand now what happens when we die. I understand why Emily moved in that coffin, and why her mother can still hear her voice. Death isn't an ending, it's a doorway. And sometimes things from the other side reach back through before the door closes completely." Emily wasn't trying to escape her coffin. She was trying to pull it shut against what was coming in after her. Authorities continue to monitor the households of the affected families, though no official explanation has ever been provided for what Linda Johnson's camera captured that December morning. The crematorium has been rebuilt following an unexplained fire that destroyed only the retort where Emily's body was cremated. The new facility uses updated equipment with multiple verification protocols before cremation can begin. As for Emily Johnson's final remains, they were interred in a small, unmarked plot at her mother's request. Groundskeepers report that no grass grows over the site, and temperature readings consistently register several degrees colder than the surrounding areas, even on the hottest summer days. Motion-activated security cameras covering that section of the cemetery regularly malfunction, capturing only static or distorted images of what appear to be small, child-sized figures gathered around the unmarked grave.
The case remains officially closed but fundamentally unsolved. What would you do if you heard your deceased loved one calling your name in the middle of the night? Would you answer? Have you ever felt the presence of someone watching you from the corner of your room, just beyond where the shadows are darkest? Leave your experiences in the comments below. Like this video if you want more unexplained cases like Emily Johnson's, and subscribe to our channel for weekly explorations into the mysteries that science still cannot explain.
And remember, just because someone has been pronounced dead doesn't mean they're truly gone.